Great to have you with us here on WPR News. Larry Mueller here. We start the show today by taking a look at life along the Mississippi River. Back with us, Reggie McLeod, editor and publisher of Big River Magazine. And the March-April issue is just coming out now. You might have it maybe in your mailbox, maybe not, but it'll be there soon. And as usual, the magazine includes lots of articles about conservation, wildlife, and history of the upper Mississippi River. As I talk with Reggie, I hope you'll join in. What questions do you have about this really significant area? And what impresses you about it? Maybe you visited it. Maybe you live there. Give us a call. The number is 800-642-1234. It's 1-800-642-1234. Or send an email to talk@wpr.org. That's talk@wpr.org. Reggie, welcome. I might have misspoken there. Is the issue still at the printers?
Good morning, Larry. It's going to the post office probably tomorrow. If there's still a post office there, but yeah.
Okay.
That's the plan anyway. So people should get it by the end of the week.
Yeah, well, I've had a chance to look at it online, and it's a dandy issue again. Remind us, for those who aren't familiar with it, what's the focus primarily of the magazine?
Well, we're a regional magazine, and we cover the driftless area and the Mississippi River, the section of it that goes through the driftless area. So we cover from the Twin Cities down to the Quad Cities and go over from about Madison, Wisconsin, over around Rochester, Minnesota, Decorah, Iowa. So it's that whole driftless area, but the focus is on the river, and most of the people live along the river in the driftless area too. So
yeah, makes sense. In your opening column in this new issue, you talk about a collection of old maps and photos from the upper Mississippi River Wildlife and Fish Refuge. And they're now held at UW-La Crosse. How did these artifacts find their way to UW-La Crosse? That's an interesting story.
Yeah, it was kind of fun to get a chance to tell that story because it was back, around 20 years ago. They closed the sign shop. The sign shop for all the national refuges was in Winona, and they were going to shut it down, and they were cleaning out the building, and a guy who worked for the Upper Mississippi River Fish and Wildlife Refuge went over there to see how they were doing and talked to the guys. And he looked in a dumpster, and there were all of these maps and photos. Many of the maps were from the late 1800s, and they were incredible maps. Some of them had been used by pilots, so they had notes on them for navigation and landmarks. And the map showed the river, of course, as it was before the lock and dam system was put in, and it was entirely different. This stretch of the river was really entirely different before the locks and dams were put in the 1930s. And these maps some of the maps actually identified groups of trees on the river bottom forests. They'd say elms, or swamp oaks or things like that. So they're really precious resources, and there probably aren't too many of those old maps left around. They're on real flimsy paper, kind of delicate things, especially since they're, almost 150 years old. So those are over at the library now at UW-La Crosse, and they're going to start scanning them in. They're trying to raise the funds to get a new scanner that can do a good job of that, and they'll put them on the web so people will be able to just look at them for free and share them around, which is incredible.
Yeah, it really is. And that Murphy Library at UW-La Crosse, you have some more information on it in the magazine, bringing together something called the Driftless River Initiative, which I found really fascinating too. Describe that.
Yeah, well, that really overlaps a lot with what we're doing. So we're really
Yeah.
it's going to make our job a little easier. The special collections at the Murphy Library probably started about 30 years ago, and they've been trying to collect a lot of regional resources and publications and government reports and so on, and provide them to the public. And this new initiative, the Driftless Initiative, is going to have more focus on the driftless area and identifying and cataloging and making available just a lot of wonderful things about the area that, like I said, some of those pieces go back to the late 1800s. And a lot of the steamboat, riverboat photos that you see in our publication and other publications are from the Murphy Library. They actually were given what is probably the largest collection of steamboat, riverboat photos in the world. A guy named Ralph Dupay, who was a salesman, when he'd travel around the country, he'd seek out these old photographs and buy them or copy them and then give them to the library. He gave them thousands of steamboat photographs. And then, because the way that works, other people that had similar collections also gave those to the library. So that was kind of how the focus on the river started. That really got things rolling.
It's really cool. I remember somebody donated a collections that included river music and movies and shift menus, a whole bunch of really interesting things.
Yeah. It's amazing. It's multimedia, and they have recordings. I remember back when I was a reporter, back in the 80s, I think, there were some students at UW-La Crosse that were going around interviewing old-timers about what the river was like early in the 20th century. And those recordings, you can listen to those recordings there, and a lot of them have been transcribed, so you can even get the printouts of the recordings of these people remembering things. So it's incredible that they captured those resources when they could, and that they're saving them and sharing them.
It really, really is. Looking at some other stories, one that I really enjoyed. Trolling in Clinton, I think, was the title. A guy, Thomas Dambo.
Yeah.
And that photo you've got in there is tremendous, by the way.
Yeah. That's one big troll. They're kind of art installations that this guy. Where is he based? Is he based in Sweden? I'm looking at it right now.
I think it's Sweden. I think.
Yeah. That's what I thought. And he's contracting to build some of these installations of trolls made out of recycled materials in Clinton next year in 2026. And this photo shows this troll made out of recycled lumber, it appears. And I would say if that guy stood up straight, he'd be about 60 feet tall, do you think, Larry?
Yeah.
But he's reclining, leaning up against a tree with the young man standing on his chest. Yeah, it is a very cool photo.
It is a very, and of course the Clinton they're kind of thinking about that as a way to draw some visitors.
Yeah, and I'm sure it will. And you know, that's an interesting thing with river cities is there's been a lot of art installations and murals, and this is going to be a spectacular one. They have a really good sawmill museum down there too that's near the river. Clinton, a lot of river towns back in the late 1800s and early 20th centuries, their shoreline was lined with sawmills, and that's where they cut up all the north woods, floated it down the river, and then made it into lumber, and that's what built a lot of the houses, not only in the river towns, but even way out west. You know, the trains were taking it out west to build towns.
Yeah, it's pretty darn cool. Well, I have to mention Pearl or Ora McGill. That was a really fascinating story to me. This is Pearl, well, that was her nickname. Pearl McGill was murdered in 1924.
Yeah. And no one, I don't think anyone was ever, well, her husband was charged.
But he wound up dead.
He wound up dead, and they don't know, maybe he was murdered or maybe it was suicide. I mean, it's one of those mysteries that probably won't ever be solved, but she had become a union organizer. She was originally hired to work in a button mill, and then specifically downstream at Muscatine, Iowa. That was kind of the pro-button capital of the world for a while. And they would harvest freshwater mussels from the river and make buttons out of the shells. And they were, if the plastic button that's probably on your shirt, if you look at it, it either looks like a piece of horn or a mussel shell. It's kind of mother of pearl.
Yeah.
And they're all plastic now, but back then they really made them out of horn and mussel shells. And she worked at a factory there in Muscatine and kind of got hired because her uncle was in the business, and she was really hired to spy on her coworkers to make sure they didn't organize unions or go on strike and stuff. And she, after working there for a while, she realized maybe they needed unions and maybe they needed to be empowered. And then she kind of switched sides and became a union organizer, and she was murdered, as were several other union organizers around that time in the 1920s.
It's a fascinating story, and just the side story, or I don't know if it's a side story, but the whole information on the pearl, the button industry at that time. I mean, that was big business. There were places all along the river there making buttons.
Yeah, and I have been in construction sites and by railroad tracks and stuff and found mussel shells, and you can still find these sometimes, with perfect holes drilled in them, about anywhere from a half inch to maybe 3/4 of an inch. And that was the waste from making the pearl buttons. They used it for fill in construction sites, and some of the alleys in Muscatine were full of those shells with holes drilled in them. Yeah, it was a big deal. And the Pearl Button Museum in Muscatine is, if you want to learn about it, it's a fantastic museum. I've been there a number of times, and it's overwhelming almost.
Well, it is, and you've got some nice photos in this magazine of not only of Pearl and some of the other women who worked at that time, but then again the museum itself.
Yeah.
Which is pretty darn cool. Reggie McLeod, editor and publisher of Big River Magazine, our guest today. You can join in with your own questions, comments, or maybe you've got a remembrance to share. The number's 800-642-1234, or you could email to talk@wpr.org. I'm Larry Mealer for WPR News. Taking a look at life along the Mississippi today with Reggie McLeod. He's editor and publisher of Big River Magazine. Always great to have him stop by and talk with us. And you can join in. Number's 800-642-1234, or you could email to talk@wpr.org. Let's go to James in Baraboo. James, hi. Thank you for calling. What's on your mind?
Hi, thank you. I have my great-grandfather's license to pilot steam vessels on the Mississippi. It's one of my most treasured possessions. He was a lawyer and a judge in La Crosse, and he had a pleasure boat that was steam-powered, and this is in about 1912 or even earlier. Let's see, the date on here is 1912, yes. So the license allows him to navigate between Wabasha, Minnesota, and McGregor, Iowa.
That's very nice, yeah.
Yeah, very, very, very cool. I wonder if you had to go through any testing for that, Reggie, to get a license like that, or if you just had to be somebody with a steamboat.
Well, up until fairly recently, people that were getting a license had to actually draw the stretch of river that they were licensed for. And they could use a map. They didn't sit there and draw it in an hour or anything. But the towboat pilots, and this is, I don't know when they changed it, because everything is digital now. They have digital maps. But up until probably about 10 years ago, I think, they'd have to draw the entire navigable part of the river, which is, I should know that exactly, but it's probably around at least 1,500 miles of river. And
so you had to demonstrate you knew what you where the good spots were to be navigating.
Oh yeah, and they know the names of the islands and the landmarks, things that they line up for when they go under a bridge. I mean, there's just thousands of details for doing that kind of work.
Yeah.
And even Wabasha down to McGregor, I mean, there's a lot going. That's a part that I'm most familiar with, that I've paddled and all of that. And there's a lot going on there, and a lot of islands and channels and everything. And it was changing more back then, before the locks and dams. Things could shift around a little bit easier.
Yeah. James, thanks a lot for calling. Appreciate it. Let's turn to Tom in Minocqua. Hi, Tom.
Good morning, Larry. I'm a Catholic priest. About 30 years ago, I was assigned to a parish in La Crosse, but I was sent to fill in at St. Lawrence, the Catholic Church in Alma. And it was in the afternoon on Christmas Eve. I was running a little late, worried about other things. So I get there, we process in, begin Mass, and I look out to my right, and there is the Mississippi River flowing by. I just kind of took my breath away and have this wonderful, force of nature right out visible from the windows of the church. And I think the windows are clear so you can look out and see the river as it flows by. So that's just one story. What I wanted to ask about is what your guest thinks about the impact of riverboats on the Mississippi, how that's just affecting life. And I kind of find it intriguing, but I also kind of find it to be disruptive to what you see as you're spending time along the river. It might be worth a show, Larry, to talk about riverboats on the Mississippi and the Great Lakes someday.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Excuse me, are you talking about the passenger riverboats or the barges and towboats?
I'm sorry, yes, the cruise ships.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
thanks, Tom.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. It's really changed a lot in the last 10 years or so, especially, and it's still changing. There were 3 companies on with riverboats, long distance cruises overnight, where people stay overnight on the boats. And one of them just went out of business. I think it was the American Queen. And now it's the American Cruise Lines is still going strong, and they've been cranking out a new boat every year, pretty much, I think. And then Viking Lines just started a couple years ago. I kind of like it. They're not particularly disruptive. Quite a few of our writers now actually work as river lorians on the boats, and that's kind of interesting. And we've known a few people who were captains and pilots on the boats. So we often go on the boats when they stop in town here and hang out a little bit. I think it's good. I think the river lorians do a good job. Usually they're people that have pretty broad knowledge of the river. In fact, the ones I know that have been doing it grew up on the river and spent a lot of time in their youth on the river. Or one friend is a pilot who was a pilot on the biggest towboat on the river for a while, the Army Corps boat. I think it's good for them to learn about the river and to visit the river towns, and they learn about river issues too when they're on the boats, as well as the history and entertainment. And people come from all over the country and all over the world to travel on those boats. So I think it's a good thing. I haven't seen anything that I would consider bad about it offhand. And those boats are pretty well managed and everything. They they have to get fresh water and get the trash off it, and they have pretty strict protocols and everything. They're pretty cool. I've never traveled on one. They're pretty expensive. They can cost usually around $1,000 a day, or maybe $700 to $1,000 a day. They take good care of you. The food's good. I've eaten on them a few times. I certainly endorse the quality of the food on there. I think I'd gain a few pounds if I went on a long cruise.
Tom, thank you so much for that remembrance and also for your question. Appreciate it very much. You can join in with your own thoughts. Maybe you have an experience to share, or maybe just have a question. Give us a call. The number is 800-642-1234, or you could email us to talk@wpr.org. That's talk@wpr.org. I got a story in the magazine about the Rapidan Dam that failed, I think it was last June. And, okay, it was in Minnesota. But it has, and of course we have Minnesota listeners, so that's fine. But there are also some effects of that dam failing that have an impact on the Mississippi.
Yes, and I really like saying Rapidan Dam, so I'm glad you brought that up. But it released 11 million cubic yards of silt into the Blue Earth River, which flows into the Minnesota River, which flows into the Mississippi River at the Twin Cities. And this is really an awful lot of silt. It's a huge volume. And people, I was hoping to find out more about when it was going to get to the Mississippi. They're particularly nervous about it on Lake Pepin,
yeah,
which of course is half in Minnesota and half in Wisconsin, because it's a wide lake with very little current. So if the silt will get down, some of it will get down that far, and it's going to settle in the lake because where the current is so slow. And the Army Corps of Engineers is currently doing, I know I shouldn't have used that word. The Army Corps of Engineers recently started a big project on the upper end of Lake Pepin by Bay City, and they're restoring the river because it's silting in very quickly, much more quickly than it would naturally, mostly because of silt coming down the Minnesota River anyway before this dam collapsed. There's so much silt coming down there largely because of agricultural drainage on the watershed. And so they're spending millions and millions of dollars to kind of dredge it out and clean it out and restore some islands and channels. And it's kind of an environmental project as well as one that's going to benefit transportation. And so that silt could potentially come down there and kind of undo the work that they're doing, and it could actually make it hard to navigate the river for towboats and the big passenger boats too once that gets to the Mississippi. But the frustrating thing about working on this story is no one really knows how much of it or when it's going to get to the Mississippi River, and that's partly because the climate change has made it so, you don't know if we're going to have a drought this spring and summer or if we're going to have floods this spring and summer. I mean, the extremes are so much broader than they used to be that everyone's just kind of keeping their fingers crossed and watching it. So it's a big deal, and I think it's already causing some big problems on the Minnesota River. There is some barge traffic on the Minnesota River that's been affected by it. And the Army Corps has had to do a lot more dredging in the Minnesota River than they would normally do because of that dam breaking.
Yeah, pretty pretty dramatic photo in your magazine, too, of the dam itself and where it kind of started to break up. It was a big earthen dam.
Yeah, well, there was no. It was. I think it was a concrete dam, but when it started to break the dam, it kind of circumvented. It went around the side, and dug into the earth. There's a bluff there, and it actually swept away a store and a home. I mean, it took a lot of soil out of the bluff on that side of the dam too. So the dam collapsed, and the soil was collapsing, and it was a mess. And again, it was largely because of climate change. They had so much rain in that watershed on the Blue Earth that it wiped out the dam. And pretty much all the dams that were built before about 2000 are out of spec because the specs have changed because the climate has changed. So they build them assuming that the maximum rainfall will be, a certain amount at a certain rate, and that's not true anymore because we've exceeded those specs.
Yeah.
So they're all a little bit vulnerable because of that.
You can join in too. Number to call 800-642-1234 or email to talk@wpr.org. I was interested in a little piece you had on what researchers at University of Minnesota and in Korea developing some technology that could identify plastic debris at the bottom of freshwater rivers and lakes. There's some potential there.
Yeah, there were a couple stories that kind of overlapped there, and one is being able to identify plastic waste in the water and differentiate it from natural waste like leaves or stems or rocks and that kind of thing. And the other one is building sort of a robot device that will be able to cruise around in the water and remove the plastic from it. It seems to me it would be much more efficient not to put the damn plastic in there to begin with. But if it's a problem in a lot of places already, and this would certainly help with remediation, efforts to clean it up. So it's pretty cool. I mean, we're going to see robots doing a lot more things, I think, in the near future.
Yeah. I agree. I thought it was a fascinating little story. Bob in Superior has a question. Let's go there. Bob, hello.
Hello again. I guess I call every other year. What I want to know is, well, to start with, I was sitting on the riverbank in St. Louis one time, looking across the river to East St. Louis, and pretty much everybody that walked by, I said, "How deep is the river here?" And actually, nobody had the faintest idea. And I asked a couple other people. It's like, well, what's the minimum depth to operate these tugboats and barges? And one person told me it was 4.5 feet. And I'm not buying that. I bet you they've got 7-foot props. But once again, I've never seen one out of the water either.
Yeah. So what's the navigable depth of the river for those tugs?
Okay, the legal depth is above St. Louis because the last lock and dam, and the locks and dams were built to maintain the channel at least 9 feet deep. So it's a 9-foot channel. So the last lock and dam is just above St. Louis there, and everything from St. Louis all the way up to St. Paul, the Army Corps has to maintain a 9-foot channel, and they have to dredge it to 9 feet. And the dams were placed. They did a huge survey of the river in the late 1920s, and they surveyed the bottom of the river, cross sections, like thousands of cross sections. And so they calculated where to place the dams so that they would hold enough water behind them to get over the shallowest spots in the river. See, that was the strategy. They just didn't build them every 30 miles. They built them below the shallow spots. And so that's the deal, is 9 foot. There was talk occasionally on doing a 12-foot channel, and I don't think that'll ever happen. It gets harder and harder for them to maintain the 9-foot channel because, again, climate change, but also the backwaters have filled in with silt in a lot of places. And, that whole river where there used to be islands, there used to be lakes in the backwaters, even up here around La Crosse and Winona, that were 30 or 40 feet deep, and there isn't any more. Some of the lakes and channels have pretty much disappeared because so much silt has settled in there because of the dams, holding it back and slowing down the river as it moves down there. So, it's a 9-foot channel. It started doing a 4.5-foot channel was the first channel that the Corps had to maintain. That's and the old river boats used to only have about a 3 or 4 foot draft, but now they can go up to 9 feet. And some of those tour boats are, I think, around 8 feet, 8.5 feet, I believe.
Okay, Bob. Thanks a lot for calling. Appreciate your call. And I think Lynn in Sister Bay may have a question that kind of relates. Lynn, hi. Thank you for calling.
Hi, Larry.
Hi, what's on your mind?
Well, I'm curious as to the impact of the quality of the water and soil erosion on the banks of these bigger ships that are going down the river.
Yeah, so the impact of the big ships on the river, studies of their impact in terms of, erosion and that sort of thing, Reggie.
All the boats cause some erosion. I think, there's riprap in a lot of places, and the part of the erosion is exacerbated a little bit. Well, no, a lot in some places because the river level used to drop in the summer, and so there was a lot more plant life in the river and a lot more plants on the shoreline that would kind of absorb some of the energy of wakes and waves and that sort of thing. And those are not there anymore because they maintain the river level at a more constant, level. So that's part of it. And I think the smaller boats often cause a more damaging wake because when I've paddled a lot on the river, and I've had a small houseboat and motorboats too, the wake from a cruiser that's going really fast is more destructive than the wake of a towboat. The towboats and the big passenger boats have more of a swell, so the water level kind of rises and falls, and you don't have as much of a wake, it seems like, the fast kind of wake that slaps up against the shore. They all have an effect on the shoreline, though, and like I said, the lack of plants makes it more damaging. Some of the plants are starting to come back, though, and some of the Army Corps projects that have restored the river, like what they're doing up in the upper Lake Pepin area, they put in riprap and they make areas where the plants grow well, and that helps a lot, but that only affects a tiny percentage of the total river.
Yeah. Lynn, thanks for calling. Appreciate it. Hazel in Hayward, we'll go to you now. Hi, Hazel.
Hi. I have two questions. My great-grandmother Grund, who was Swedish, during the Civil War used to gather, we always thought it was clams to make buttons from, to make money, but would it have really been mollusks? And then the other question is, what about the mounds, like effigy mounds and regular mounds from long ago? I presume they're all protected now, but what have been the destruction or any way of now protecting things that didn't used to be protected? So I'll just hang up and hear your answers.
All right, thanks for calling. A couple of questions for you there.
They're both big questions. Well, the button one is easier because the mollusks, which is kind of a broad term. Mollusks includes, I think even snails and octopuses. Yeah. But the clam shells in the river really are mussel shells. There's only a couple types of small clams that actually live in the river. And I think a fingernail clam is one. I'm not sure about the others, but they were technically mussel shells that they harvested, the big ones. And in fact, speaking of ancient sites, there are places on the islands where there are big piles of mussel shells, and I used to think that was an anomaly of the current that would, kind of push them there. But actually, the Indians that lived on the river they were a big food source, and they were like trash piles of mussels that they had eaten. They tossed the shells on there. So, and regarding the Indian mounds, if they're on private land, you can do whatever you want with them. You could bulldoze them and so on. But I think people now are sensitive enough where most people that have them on their land kind of take good care of them. Not always, and that can be an issue with construction projects sometimes. If they're on federal land, they're protected. Generally, if they're on state land, I'm not sure what all the state regulations are. I know Minnesota and Wisconsin protect burial sites, ancient burial sites, if they're on public land. But then also, if federal funds are paying part of a project, they have to, that's moving the earth around. They also have to contract to have an archaeologist at the site to make sure they don't destroy any mounds or any archaeological sites. So if it's a county, they probably don't. And the states might regulate it that way too. If it's a construction site, I don't know if they require them to have an archaeologist, but if it came to light that there was an archaeological site there, they'd probably protect it. But on private land, people can do whatever they want. A lot of those mounds have already been dug up. It was kind of a thing in the late 1800s and early 20th century to go have a picnic and dig up an Indian mound and throw the bones around and see if you could find some arrowheads. And fortunately, we don't do that anymore. Yeah. I hope.
I hope so too. Reggie McLeod, our guest editor and publisher of Big River Magazine. I'm Larry Mealer for WPR News.
Happy birthday, a great big to-do. Let's celebrate, yeah, celebrate you. So make a wish on your special day. You're looking great, so great, come celebrate. Happy birthday from us to you. From the place, yes, from the place where dreams do come true. So here's a wish, 1, 2, 3, 4-part harmony. Happy birthday, your special day to you. Yes, to you.
Well,
happy
Larry,
birthday, Reggie.
Larry, Joel, and Jeff, you guys have been practicing, obviously. I'm very impressed.
Well,
Thank you.
It's your birthday today, and you were gracious enough to spend part of your day with us, so happy birthday to you. And frankly, happy birthday to anybody else listening. Today's your birthday. Happy birthday. Consider that a song for you as well as for Reggie McLeod.
Wow.
That was great. Reggie, editor and publisher of Big River Magazine. I was an old barber shopper myself.
Really?
Yeah. So I really liked Jill's selection there of the Happy Birthday song for sure.
Yeah, I don't think I've heard that one before.
Oh man. Let's take some calls. If you want to join in, the number's 800-642-1234. Email to talk@wpr.org. Paul in Baraboo, thank you for calling. What's on your mind?
Hey, Larry. Paul Walter with the Sauk County Historical Society, and we're the proud owners of the Man Mound National Historic Landmark. And I just wanted to clarify that all Indian mounds, whether they're conical, effigy, linear, are all protected by Wisconsin's burial sites law. So whether they're on private property or public property, they cannot be touched or destroyed.
That is very good news to have, Paul. Thank you for calling. And Reggie, we're nice to have that here in Wisconsin. It's possible other states might not have that designation.
Yeah, I think so. And thanks for clarifying that. I was under the impression that on private land they could mess with them. But yeah, that's good that they're not. They have a road going across the Man Mound. Unfortunately, they built that before it was protected. But yeah, that's good.
Thank you, Paul, for filling us in on that. Kent had emailed, what's known about the Monticello nuclear plant and the waste that was dumped into the ground, which then apparently seeped into the Mississippi?
Yeah, that's deuterium, which is kind of heavy water. It's not real radioactive, but it is, and all of the nuclear plants leak some. There's radioactivity coming off of the whole industry. I mean, I could get into that. Monticello is a very old plant. It was not built to last as long as it's been operating, and that's true with a lot of them. Minnesota and Wisconsin both have moratoriums on building new nuclear plants, as far as I know. And a lot of them are on the river. In fact, if I can digress quickly, sure. I actually wrote a song about that back when I was singing. That was on All Things Considered once, and around the late '80s they played it in its entirety, and it was about that. It was saying everyone says, well, it's a little leak, and it was addressing all the nuclear plants on the river, and that by the time it gets to New Orleans, the river is glowing, which of course it's not, but it was just trying to get that concept across that, it's not a big danger, but I think you're going to be hearing a lot more about it now that there's proposals to build new nuclear plants that are supposed to be modular and safe. I'm a little skeptical, but that's not what we're here to discuss. I'll have to start singing that song again. Maybe we'll see.
Let's take another call. Treble in Lodi. Thank you for calling. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I've got a question for your guest, and thank you for answering my call, Larry.
Sure.
Enjoy your show. My question is about the location of the final wiping out of the British band of Foxes and Sauk Indians at the mouth of the Bad Axe River, which empties into the Mississippi River. And I finally found it on the map, my gazetteer. And it doesn't look like there's any kind of monument or anything for this battle that occurred when the United States Army and the various militias killed the remaining Indians, their wives, children, and grandparents at this site where they were trying to escape across the Mississippi River.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty familiar with that. There are some monuments on the highway there, and it's interesting because the monuments that are built at different times tell different stories. The best way to find out about it is there's an autobiography of Black Hawk, which I've read a number of times. They reached the river where Black Hawk Park is now, which is a park and campground operated by the Army Corps of Engineers, and there's a plaque there right on the shoreline by what they call Massacre Island out there, and it was a massacre, basically. It was mostly the militia, which were kind of undisciplined. And they were shooting everybody. They were shooting the women and children. In fact, at that point, there were a lot of elderly people and women. It was mostly elderly people and women and children that they had tracked down, and the band had tried to surrender several times, and when they did, they were fired upon, and they had worked their way across there. It's an interesting story. I don't have time to really get into it, but Most of them were probably massacred there. A few made it across the river, and the Dakota people from Winona, Minnesota, actually went down there and killed a lot of them that made it across the river because they were enemies. And a few of the warriors escaped up the Bad Axe River and were captured, including Black Hawk, who had led them. They were called the British Band because they took the British side in the War of 1812, and Black Hawk had done some pretty impressive strategic moves in battles. He was known as kind of a brilliant person in war, but he was pretty old when that whole thing started. It was basically because their land had been taken away. You know?
Yeah. Treble, thank you very much for calling. Appreciate it. We got time for another story or two. The one story that kind of interested me was people in Iowa, Minnesota, Arkansas, I think, and I forget, maybe one other state, might be surprised to know that the legal description of their property ties to a single rock in a swamp in Arkansas.
Yeah, I got a kick out of that, and we usually try to confine our stories to the driftless area and so on, but that story was just too good to pass up because that rock was used as the starting point for the surveys, all the way into the Dakotas and so on. I mean, it was a huge part of the Louisiana Purchase was surveyed from that rock. That was
they needed a point of reference.
Yeah, that was the point of reference for all those surveys in all those states west of the Mississippi. So the parts of Minnesota that are east of the Mississippi weren't part of the Louisiana Purchase. But yeah, and so I couldn't pass the other story I couldn't pass up, even though it was in Indiana, was a guy who rescued someone who fell through the ice, trying to rescue a dog that fell through the ice. He rescued the dog and the guy with his jump rope because this guy is a professional jump roper. And even though it was in Indiana, we have so much ice around here and people are falling through it, I thought it was appropriate. But it's just such a goofy story, I couldn't resist.
I don't blame you. Ellie emailed to say they live in Middleton, and Ellie and her spouse make a trip to the Effigy Mounds National Monument each year. Gorgeous area, great views of the river, lovely trails, awesome museum. They've learned a lot there, and it's a wonderful place to visit.
I agree totally. I love that place, and I go there pretty regularly. I've been there many, many times. Yeah.
So what are you going to do for your birthday besides being on this show?
Well, I kind of partied yesterday, and I have a board of directors meeting this afternoon. So I don't know. I think I offered to bring dinner home, and I think I'm going to be surprised when I come home. At least I hope so, because I was told not to. And I'll probably just have a little drink of scotch and watch a movie, kind of low-key, you know.
Yeah, well...
I mean, this was the high point. The singing was the high point, Larry.
Well, it's always a high point when you're on the show, Reggie. You know so much, and I always learn something, and I know our listeners do as well. And that latest issue, that March-April issue, it's going to be landing on people's doorsteps pretty darn quickly. How do people find out and maybe subscribe to Big River?
Well, our website is at bigrivermagazine.com, and we have an 800 number. You can call in at 1-800-303-8201.
303-8201. Reggie, thanks. Yeah. Happy birthday, and we'll look forward to your next visit.
Oh, thank you, Larry. Have a happy birthday, too.
Yeah. Mine's a ways away yet, May 14th. Reggie McLeod, editor and publisher of Big River Magazine, our guest. Always fun. There's a lot of good information in this latest issue. Well, they're in all the issues. Coming up, our weather guys. They're going to talk weather and climate with you. That next. I'm Larry Mealer for WPR News. Well, we just went through a cold spell here in Wisconsin, and now we're entering into a warm spell, I would call it. A good time to talk with our weather guys today. We'll talk temperature extremes a bit with them, and of course answer your questions about climate and weather as well as we move along today. One of our weather guys, Jon Martin. John, hi. Good to have
Larry.
you with us.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Yeah, John's a professor and in the Department of Atmospheric and Oceanic Sciences at UW-Madison. Steve Ackerman is an emeritus in that department and also former vice chancellor for research and grad education at UW-Madison. Steve, welcome back to you.
Yeah, it's great to be back, no matter what the weather is.
And as we talk with our guests, again, you can join in, and I hope you will. And if you have a weather photo, cloud photo, or another weather photo of some sort, I hope you'll send that in. You could email a question or a photo to talk@wpr.org. That's talk@wpr.org. Or if you just have a question, give us a call or a comment. Number's 800-642-1234, 1-800-642-1234. Well, we had that cold snap, and it was cold.
It was
Steve.
cold.
Yeah.
It was nice and cold.
Where did it come from?
Canada. Fabrique au Canada. It always does here. So, that's the chipper answer. It always comes from Canada. But there was a disturbance in the lower stratosphere that may have had a role to play in sending a dollop of fairly intense cold air over central and eastern North America over the last couple of weeks. And we have experts in the department who know more about that than I do, but that's one of the things that's been buzzed about.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting with the stratospheric circulation generating the lower level cold air to come our way.
It's really interesting. I wish I knew more about it, but this is where the word polar vortex really has been an established term forever. The stratospheric polar vortex arises from the fact that the sun goes down at high latitudes and doesn't come back up for 6 months, or still a large fraction of that. And it gets really cold at the pole and warmer everywhere else in the lower stratosphere. So there's an intense jet that circumnavigates the pole. And it sometimes gets bumped around a little bit by stuff that goes on in the underlying troposphere. And that can cause these kinds of things to happen.
Yeah, it was interesting. Joel was our producer was letting me know that Glasgow, Montana, on February 20th, plunged to minus 51 degrees.
That's 9 degrees shy of their all-time low, though. That's nothing.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah, they shrug it off. They say, bring it on.
That's one of those where if you spit or if you threw a glass of water in the air,
yeah, you got problems.
It would freeze, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think the water would.
The water would freeze before it hit the ground almost.
I think it's minus 74 is when gasoline turns to jelly in your engine. So they're not that far from that.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing?
That is, yeah.
Well,
that's why I don't live in Montana. It's beautiful as a country. It is. Winters, no.
Too much.
Was that unusual for that vortex?
Not really. No. I think what's unusual is the media attention to the kind of almost normal extremes, if there's such a word as that. Every once in a while, a winter will have one of these 2-week periods where it's really cold over a widespread part of our country. But it's certainly not without precedent, and it's not something that if you ask a person, well, like me, who likes the winter at the beginning of the year, do you think that might happen? Yeah, there's a reasonable chance it might happen. So it's not really so extreme.
I wonder if it was also the hype was followed by having such warm Decembers, warm Januaries up until then, no snow.
Right. That's unusual. Yeah. That combination's probably pretty unusual. But, yeah, the actual 2 weeks in mid-February where it's really cold is not so weird.
Right, we've been there, done that.
Yeah. And
I'm glad it's over.
Me too.
Yeah, the other extreme, I went online to look at the temperatures kind of in the state. In Hayward today, the high will be 45.
Yeah, it's unreal.
And in so way to the north. Yeah. And in Madison, it'll be 48 is the predicted high for the day.
Thankfully, we have snow on the ground now, so that we don't get into the 50s.
Yeah, it won't take long for that. I think it's gone today, probably. We lost a lot just last night. When my wife and I came home, we had maybe 4 inches left, and it was only 2 this morning. So it's just sublimating
really
away like crazy.
Yeah, we had a big, water chain that was frozen solid.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, and it's melted.
Yeah, gone away.
Overnight. It was just like, what?
Yeah,
that's not supposed to happen.
I was wondering about, we have deep frost, even in the northern part of the state. And I was looking at the snow depths, anywhere from 4 to 16 inches. And if you get this, and they're going to have, they've got rapid warming in northern Wisconsin, so you wonder if there's not going to be some flooding.
Yeah,
as
possible.
a result.
Oh, yeah, right, because the water's just going to run off the frozen ground.
This thing is coming without any strong precipitation event. This little, and I'll say it's going to be a little warm spell. I think by Thursday and Friday we'll be back to what we kind of consider February weather. So it's not going to last forever. But it's not going to come with any heavy precipitation. Sometimes the warm-ups come with a double whammy. It warms up, melts, and precipitates on top of that. And that's really bad.
That's the problem.
Yeah, that's bad. Ken in Kenosha has a question. Let's go there. Hi, Ken.
Hi, Larry. Hey, a week or so ago, you had somebody on, and one of the callers, or two of the callers, had called in asking about the increases in wind over these last couple of years. And the guy, he kind of discounted that, and I'm just another person out there that is seeing a lot more wind and just questioning what more there is on that.
It's interesting you bring that up, Ken, because our weather guys here did a newspaper column. Has Wisconsin become windier?
Yeah, and I think we took that on because we heard Larry's show where people were asking that question. So we turned to the Wisconsin Climate Office at at Hopkins in particular, and he did the analysis, and no, it's not getting windier. In fact, the mean wind is actually decreasing. So it's getting weaker with time, particularly over the last few years.
That is very interesting.
Yeah.
But so a lot of people think it's getting windier anyway.
And maybe that's because, and this is something that I didn't look into, or at least I certainly didn't look into it, is, when you're looking at the mean wind that's decreasing, and so you may be paying more attention to those days when you get a good wind. Because you haven't experienced it in a while. So you pay more attention to it physically, not necessarily from what the data is saying. But I was surprised about that, too, to see such a steady decrease.
Yeah, so there was some research on this, and in fact, that's not the case. Oh, but thanks for calling. Trent in Madison, your turn. Hi, Trent.
Hello. My question is in regards to, it's kind of a bit of a tangent, but I'm an outdoorsy guy. I like to get outdoors. Last year was lousy with ticks, and I'm new to Wisconsin, and I was told that's because you had such a mild winter last winter. So my question would be, were the two cold snaps enough to maybe kill off some of those ticks, or should I be expecting another lousy year for ticks? So, yeah, that's my question.
Yeah, you can probably expect a lousy year for ticks.
I would think so, too, yeah. I think, this was we've had two periods, one 3 or 4 day period in late January that was really unusual. Well, not unusually cold, but cold. And then this 10-day period in February. But that's really it. Aside from that, the whole cold season has been above normal. So I suspect the ticks are going to be pretty good.
Yeah. We did have, no snow in parts of Wisconsin where the frost went down pretty deep because there wasn't any snow.
And that might help.
That could be a factor, that works against them.
Yeah.
But Trent, I wouldn't bet on fewer ticks, especially if you're an outdoor kind of guy.
Get that DEET, right?
Yeah, right. Unfortunately,
you need to keep a watch out and wear the proper clothing,
right?
And including I've got some of the clothing that is already. I was going to say infected, but it's the material, anti-tick material, is embedded into the clothing itself.
Oh, that's nice.
And you can even wash it several times and still not have. It'll still be effective. So, Trent, something for you or anybody else to think about if you're planning to spend time outdoors. Thanks for calling. Let's go to Dean in Evergreen, Colorado. Hi, Dean.
Hi, guys. Hey, thanks for taking my call. We've had a roller coaster ride of weather out here, and the strongest extreme I've ever seen for a temperature inversion near Denver, we were about 2,000 feet higher in the foothills, but it was over 30 degrees warmer at our elevation than it was in nearby Denver.
Wow.
Huge inversion. in fact, we had coincident with that a jet or air traffic induced snowstorm on the flight pattern through Denver. And that was documented by the Weather Service. I've never seen anything like that before. But my question actually, with the cold snap before this one, I took synoptic meteorology back in my undergrad days, and that was shortly after the Norwegian School of Meteorology came up with the idea of fronts. Of course, I'm kidding a little bit. But, I was expecting to see an advancing blob of cold air through Canada down this way that would be replicated here, and warm, slightly warmer. But it actually seemed like a lot of cold air was adding on to the cold air mass as it was descending into the lower 48. And I was wondering if there's a vertical complement of cold air that's coming from the upper part of the atmosphere, troposphere, down to the lower part of the troposphere where the Earth's surface is. And in other words, is there a refortification of cold air from higher up as the cold air moves south?
Probably not. I think that what can happen occasionally, and you can, if you're paying attention to weather maps, you can see it, especially in the slope topography of the central and western part of America, that you can see, you don't see the air rising, but you see a manifestation of the fact that it has risen because it cools by expansion. So sometimes we see cold air coming across the border in Montana, heading down toward Wyoming, Colorado, and if there's an easterly component to the wind, the air at about a mile above sea level actually will get colder. And you think, how is that happening as it comes out of Canada? It's because the air is rising on the leeward side. In that case, it's the eastern side of the Rockies with an east wind. And so that might be something that happened. I wasn't paying particular attention to that, so I don't know if that was the case this time. I've seen that happen before. So it's really not a replenishment from levels aloft. It's really just a vertical advection of air that cools it off by expansion.
Very interesting. Dean, thank you very much for calling. Appreciate your call. You can join in too. Number to call 800-642-1234. 1-800-642-1234 is the number to call. You can also email a question or a weather photo to talk@wpr.org. That's talk@wpr.org. I'm Larry Mealer for WPR News. Great to have you along today on WPR News. Talking with the weather guys today is Steve Ackerman and Jon Martin. John's a member of the Department of Atmospheric and Oceanic Sciences at UW-Madison, a professor. Steve Ackerman, emeritus professor in that same department. Always great to have them come by, and certainly questions for them. Give a call at 800-642-1234. Email to talk@wpr.org. Let's go to Don in Iron River next. Hi, Don.
Hi, Don here. Say, last week, not a cloud in the sky, bright sunny day. I live 15 miles away from Lake Superior. Lake effect snow. I understand the physics, but just absolutely beautiful.
Oh, so not a cloud in the sky, but the snow's falling.
Bingo.
Wow.
Yeah, that's nice. That's rare, but nice.
Yeah. Particularly on a nice sunny day.
Yeah. Man.
How far in would you get a lake effect? I suppose it depends on the wind.
Depends on the wind
and how strong the wind is.
Moisture of the air, too, even without the lake. So a lot of things, but those would be the primary ones,
Yeah. Don, thanks for calling. Appreciate your call. The snow reminded there were no clouds for Don, but there was some work on cloud cover and climate change.
So there was a recent paper that came out that, one of the things we do with satellites, and I've done this for a lot of my career, is look at how the Earth is covered with satellites and what is the fraction of cloud cover. And what this paper observed over the last 2 years, that there was a decrease in the amount of cloud cover. And then they took it the next step, which I think was maybe a little bit premature in that if you have less clouds, then you're going to have more solar energy reach the surface, which is going to increase the energy gains of the planet, which will make it warmer. And so they were asking the question, and it's a good question to ask, whether or not a decrease in cloud cover is going to enhance global warming that we're seeing due to human activities. And it's a good question. We've been looking at cloud cover pretty accurately since the mid-1990s, I would say. So the data set's there. And it would be important, not just 2 years of data. When you're looking at climate and this kind of impact, you really got to see something over a much longer time period. So I think they'll still be looking at it. And if it does go down, the amount of cloud covers, cloud cover from space is very white. And so solar energy, which would normally get to this, not get to the surface because it would be reflected back out to space, makes its way to the surface and will heat the land up or the water up. But I think it's a little too early to start jumping to whether or not that's causing the global warming that we're seeing, because it's not. It's human carbon dioxide that's doing that.
They were talking about, and maybe you mentioned it, overall energy imbalance.
Yeah, so the Earth, in terms of climate, is like anybody. Whether or not you warm up is a function of your energy gains and your energy losses. So if you have a particular cloud cover, say it's 50%, that means 50% of the solar energy is going to be reflected back out to space. If that goes from 50 to 20, then you've just increased your energy gains, because now the loss is only 20% of the solar energy. So it's a good analysis, but I just think it's a little premature to start jumping to that warming.
I would think different clouds would have a different.
And they do. Stratus clouds over water, for example, is really, really bright. Cirrus clouds that we have over land or snow cover isn't going to change it that much if that goes away. So it's very much a function of cloud type as well as cloud cover.
You were writing a story, or wrote a story for us about ice spikes, and that caught my attention because I have a good friend, Dan Detmers, put you onto this.
Yeah, he was out walking on the lake, and it's actually fascinating. And what it is if you think of an icicle, how they drift from a rooftop or something like that. Imagine it broken off and stick it on a lake, a frozen lake, and it just sticks up like an ice spike. And what it causes it is actually really fascinating, because it's about the properties of water. The day before, it was really warm, and so we had a lot of puddles on the lake. And then at night, those puddles are going to freeze. So they freeze from the outside in, and they get a frost covering on the top. Water expands as it freezes. I think we've all had cans of something expand. So what happens is, as that ice is freezing, the top freezes, except for maybe a little hole, and then the bottom freezes. And then as the bottom freezes, that liquid water is going to want to expand. And it's got nowhere to go. It can't go down. It can only go up through that little hole. And so that water, as it freezes, just gets an ice spike that just sticks up through the surface. And it's absolutely fascinating. I've never seen it, but doing some more research on it, if you have a bird bath, you could also, if you have a warm day, like this might be a day to do it. Put some liquid water in your bird bath during the day, and when it gets below freezing at night, go out and see if an ice spike forms.
Yeah. Very interesting.
Yeah. I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
Well, actually, the photo that he took, there were a lot of those like spikes, and I don't know how tall they were.
Yeah, that's right. He didn't say how tall they were.
They looked fairly tall.
Yeah, they were at least a few inches, because the photograph, you didn't have to zoom in or anything.
No,
it was easy to pick them out.
Yeah, that was, Dan was bragging about that to me the other day. He got a photo credit in the newspaper. Oh, boy. Well, a lot of, and we've talked about this a little bit, the National Weather Service, it was a week ago or so, you wrote about the importance of the National Weather Service. Yeah. How was that agency established? It was back a ways. wasn't
it? 1870. It started. The rumblings started in 1868 or 69 here in this state, as a matter of fact. But President Grant was in office at the time, and of course he'd saved the Union and was the great general of the second half of the Civil War, and his experience in the military made him well aware of the fact that the weather is an important factor in those campaigns, and that knowing about even knowing what the conditions are someplace else, not even necessarily a forecast, is really valuable information. So when he gets elected in 1868, the country's expanding, and Grant at the helm realizes there's a really important need for weather information across the country as it gets bigger. And so people here in the state of Wisconsin who were friendly with him, because he's an Illinoisan himself, ended up convincing him in the first half of his first term, we should really have some sort of a national weather service. And it started out being called the Signal Service, and it was signed into law February 9th, 1870. Then the first observation started November 1st, 1870. And I think it was within a week that Increase Lapham made the first maritime warning based on that stuff for a ship or for a storm on Lake Michigan, saved some ships. So it benefited the country right away within a week.
How did they predict the weather or forecast the weather? I mean, they didn't have obviously the kinds of things we got today.
No, it's mostly it was first a telegraph service to just set up an observation network. And then if you knew the weather was a certain way in Milwaukee today, you might have a reasonable expectation when you start looking at it carefully that it's going to be that way in Buffalo 12 hours later, in Poughkeepsie the next day, and so on. And forecasting evolved in that way. It wasn't really scientifically rigorous, but it was empirically rigorous. And that's how it started. But the Weather Service did not become the modern Weather Service really until 1950, if you ask me.
Yeah.
And now we still have the empirical expertise, but now we also use numerical weather prediction to actually do the forecasting.
It's the best
and
combination.
It still needs to be a national endeavor. It can't be broken up by states or.
Nope.
I mean, we don't have wars yet in the interior of the U.S., but a lot of economy depends on the weather and getting it right and having a government agency doing it correctly and non-biasedly is really, really important.
Yeah, and without a profit motive. That's really the biggest thing right there. And you differentiate between private companies in a national endeavor is that there's no profit motive. The only responsibility is to the citizens of the country. That's it. And that makes it a totally different enterprise.
Yeah, and it reminded me, I was telling somebody this the other day. I was in England a couple of years ago, and it was clear the forecast was rain. So, I get up in the morning and I say, I'm going to get the radar and see what it looks like. Couldn't find it.
Yeah.
And then somebody there said, you got to pay for it.
Yeah.
And I was like, but you don't have to in the U.S.
No,
and
you do not.
It's freely available for anybody.
That's right. In fact, that's a really good point.
Amazing.
There's an ecosystem that's developed around the presence of a national weather service that includes private enterprise.
Yes.
There's a lot of private companies use products that are paid for effectively at their in origin anyway by the National Weather Service. And so they repackage things. They may give more site-specific forecasts and appeal to certain clients in a way that the Weather Service doesn't have a mandate to do. But in effect, the same information that underlies those forecasts comes for free from taxpayer funding. So we've already figured out how to do this.
Right.
And we're constantly tinkering with that balance in that ecosystem, but we know how to do it. There's no need to redo it again. Yeah.
And of course, it looks like there may be some layoffs with the Weather Service.
It's just a tragedy. I feel myself at the University of Wisconsin. Steve can say the same thing. We hold our students to an extraordinarily high standard, and that's known throughout our community, scientific community, both operationally and in the graduate academic realm. You don't get a better education than you get at Wisconsin. So there's times where those poor kids are really killing themselves to understand this stuff, and we don't let up on the gas. And then to have, a bunch of people with a view that isn't even rooted in reality telling them they can't work anymore because they've only been there a year and a half. It breaks my heart. It makes me angry.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, I'm going to switch to Canada for just a minute because a friend of mine, I wonder about the Weather Service in Canada and when it was formed. I've got a good friend, Dave McDonald. I spent a lot of time in Saskatchewan, and he always said, whatever the weather is in Saskatchewan, we're going to get it about a day or two later.
Yeah, that's a good
in
bet.
Wisconsin.
It's a pretty good bet.
I just wondered when. Any idea?
I don't know that off the top of my head, but it's Canadian Meteorological Center, And they've had a pretty thoroughgoing weather service in Canada for, I think, nearly as long as us, perhaps as long as us. They were, the Confederation was 1870, so right around the same time.
Yeah.
Around the whole world, governments were realizing that a national weather service was a good idea at about that same time. So I wouldn't be surprised that a brand new Canada had thought the same thing. So then my guess would be within the 10 years of Confederation.
Particularly when they see the advantage of what the U.S. has been able to accomplish back then. Yeah.
Jan in Eau Claire has a question for us. Let's go to Jan. Hi, Jan. Thank you for calling.
Hi. My question has to do with crepuscular rays.
Okay.
When the sun is out, there are clouds, and there's enough haze in the air. You can see the sunbeams coming out of the bottom of the cloud and going down to the earth. People call them God rays.
Yeah, Jacob's ladder is another phrase, because they used to think of that as that was a ladder up to heaven that you can get. What it is, as you're saying, the atmosphere may be hazy at that time, and if there weren't clouds there, it would be that hazy white that you often see on the horizon. But with the clouds there are gaps in the clouds, and so the solar energy, the rays from the sun, go through those holes. And actually, sort of what you're seeing is not just the beams of the scattered light, but it's you could also think of it as the shadows from the cloud are blocking that light from being scattered. And they're crepuscular just because it's three-dimensional. So anytime you look at three-dimensional art or objects, as you get further in the distance gets smaller. And that's what you're seeing with regard to that structure of what they look like.
Yeah, they're stunning when you see them.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Jan, thank you so much for calling. Appreciate your call. Ken emailed, could you guys give us an explanation as to how extreme temperature can affect broadcast signals like WPR had earlier this month? Well, we had lots of problems for a few hours one day.
So, what comes to my mind, and I wonder if you guys have figured this out, is as the earlier caller had mentioned, Dean, about temperature inversions. Sometimes radio signals will bounce off those inversions. But that'll make you go further in distance, not less.
Right. That's true, yeah.
Yeah.
So, I know, isn't there a fluctuation, too, with the season of, what is it, the ionosphere?
The
that has something to do
ionosphere,
with it?
that's right.
That also fluctuates up and down, but I think more locally, it's inversions. Yeah. It's really interesting.
Mary Kay in Kenosha has something for us. Hi, Mary Kay.
Hi. There's two things I'd like to bring up. First one is if the state could hire more people for, the weather people instead of the feds, because we do get grants. That's the first thing. The second thing is I'm concerned about the winter fog we had this year. I'm hearing things that was acid rain. Is that true? And should we be warned when that happens?
No, I don't think the fog was acid rain. I think we've done a pretty good job at actually preventing a lot of pollution from getting into the atmosphere that would cause acid rain or acid fog. So it's probably just regular fog.
Yeah.
And the state hiring the state, if you're going to hire state employees, of course, you just need to have a state government that's willing to do that. But I think you'd see that in private industry more than in the state doing it, because the federal, at least up until recently, the federal employment was really doing the job that needed to be done.
Yeah, you could imagine if you're a state weather service officer, if there were such a thing, and you're working in La Crosse, you never look to the west because your obligation is to the citizens of Wisconsin only. But in reality, of course, you have to look across the river and say, hey, we see some weather over in Minnesota that's going to make an impact on citizens here, or the vice versa, weather here making an impact soon on citizens in Minneapolis. We need to let them know. So one needs to have a national weather service if you're going to have a weather service at all, it seems to me, because otherwise you just have little fiefdoms making forecasts for small areas, and that's not going to do anybody any good.
Yeah. Thanks for that question. Thunder snow is another column that you guys covered. Is there such a thing as thunder snow?
Yeah. There is. It's vivid and exciting when it happens.
It doesn't happen all that often,
no,
but when it does.
Unfortunately, it's rather uncommon, but not unprecedented, and it is dramatic sometimes. I mean, January 26, 1996, I remember that. I came across the threshold of my house with my little girl at the time, 2 years old, and we heard the loudest crack of thunder and the brightest flash of lightning I have ever seen with snow. And then we proceeded to have 2 or 3 inches of snow per hour for the next couple of hours. It was amazing. So it shares a convective origin with deep thunderstorms in the summertime. It's just that the conditions that go into making those types of thunderstorms are just so hard to come by in the wintertime. The air is not as poorly stratified. It's not as full of moisture. It's more strongly forced to rise. That's the only thing working in favor of the wintertime aspect of these. But it's rare but dramatic.
So I'm thinking about the potential danger. I mean, comparing a thunderstorm and lightning in the winter versus lightning in the summer.
Now that you say it, Larry, the few times I've experienced thundersnow, Steve, maybe you have other ones, I've never seen a streak of lightning across the sky.
It's occurring in cloud, or cloud to cloud,
that's
not
a
cloud
distinction.
to ground.
Yeah.
So
it's in cloud.
Probably, so there's less.
Probably, yeah.
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 One, there's less occurrence of it, and then two is it's more in cloud or cloud to cloud, and not cloud to ground, and that's obviously the ones that kill people.
Yeah, right.
Jan and Eau Claire called back to ask a sort of further clarification about the crepuscular sun rays. Why do they diverge as they come out of the clouds? Jan's puzzled why they're not parallel.
So the sides are parallel, and if you think of it like a train track, as you look at it, sit on a train track and look, as you get further down the track, they converge.
Yes.
And so as you go from the ground up to the cloud, which is further away, they'll converge again.
Interesting, yeah.
How is, George emailed, how is AI affecting meteorology or weather forecasting?
It's beginning to have a profound impact. Is being strongly considered as a tool to use for some of these things, especially climate and weather forecasting. You could imagine it. It doesn't sound crazy to ask the question, hey, if I have this set of conditions around the continental United States on February 24th, in the last 70 years, what was the weather like in Minneapolis as a day later as a consequence of those things? And you can start to use that kind of an approach to enhance the instinct or the actual output that you might get from a forecast model and the expert judgment of a forecaster. So there's ways in which you can bolster, support, maybe extend insights that we already can develop from various other computer-based techniques that really do differ in their conceptual approach. And what I'm happy about, from my perspective, as a non-modeler, I don't do that stuff, is that the people in our field who do are being really open-minded about the possibility that artificial intelligence type programs and approaches might help them, but they're not letting themselves be overwhelmed by the promise. So it's a really sober approach, and I think that means we're going to squeeze the most lemonade as we can out of it, whatever it is, if it's a lemon or not.
Joe in Ironwood, Michigan has a question. Let's go there. Hi, Joe.
Yeah, hi. Good afternoon. I'm in Michigan, big snow country. Okay. Sure, I believe in lake effect snow, but when you have these years where the lake is frozen over solid, and you know as well as anybody, in 1996 it was just brutal. So February, March, April, we had way more snow than average. And there's other years, too, going back between 97 and 73, that a considerable amount of ice. What goes on with that ice cover, and it continues to snow way beyond average even?
Well, is the whole lake covered by ice?
That's what I was going to ask.
Yeah.
In 96, it was solid.
I thought we hadn't had a solid year till 2013-14, but I know 96 we had a really cold spell in early February. I do remember that. Yeah, well, I don't know what to say. I have a feeling that one of the lakes that might affect your snow might be the one that's still open. Superior never freezes over. So if you've got the right wind direction off Lake Superior and you're in, the Iron Mountains of Michigan, you're going to feel some lake effect snow every single year because Superior is never going to freeze over. Some of the smaller parts of the lakes might, but that's my best guess on the fly.
Yeah, and then the other one, I would think maybe there were just more storms.
It could be, yeah.
And so not just lake effect, but in general, more snow in that area.
And or less in the year that you get almost nothing,
Right,
Yeah, makes sense. Joe, thanks very much for calling. Appreciate your call.
It is interesting.
Steve Ackerman, Jon Martin, our weather guys, our guest today. You can join in to the number to call, 800-642-1234. Or you could email us to talk@wpr.org. We'll get you on pretty quickly. I'm Larry Mealer for WPR News. Taking a look at weather and climate on the program today with our weather guys guests, Steve Ackerman and Jon Martin, both connected with both professors. Actually, Steve's an emeritus professor in the Department of Atmospheric and Oceanic Sciences. Jon Martin, currently a professor and former chair of Atmospheric and Oceanic Sciences. And a quick reminder, if you missed part of our show, you want to hear it again, you can always go to our archives at wpr.org/Larry to hear recordings of our past broadcasts, and they go way back. Quite a long ways back, and sometimes helps us when somebody sends me a note and says, several years back, you did a show with the weather guys, let's say. And
you said the lakes didn't freeze.
They said this. I don't believe them, or whatever it is. And we can sometimes look back and find out. So anyway, WPR.org/Larry, and you can find out, listen to past programs. Carolyn in Madison has a question. Hi, Carolyn.
Hi. I'm wondering under what conditions, barometric pressure, or dew point, or whatever, does smoke, like, not go straight up, but seems to fall or sink from a campfire, sink down?
Yeah.
Yeah, from skipping campfires for a moment, because I think a lot of that would be associated with wind.
Yeah.
But when you see smoke like coming out of smokestacks or things like that, sometimes they'll just go straight off, and that means they hit an inversion. So at some point, the temperature is going to change, so the temperature is warmer than where the smoke is, and it'll just stay there. There are also winds can actually generate the smoke coming out of smokestacks and bring it down to the surface, depending on the type of wind structure in the atmosphere.
Yeah, the one that catches my eye, Steve brought up, is the inversion one. When we have a really cold day around here, sometimes I can see on my way to work that the steam plant right next to us, the smoke isn't going anywhere in the vertical, and I think, wow, that's really cold today.
Oh, Carolyn, thank you for calling. Alan in Ripon, we'll go to you. Hi, Alan.
I was going to talk about two different events that occurred in weather. I guess I'll take the one in regard to the Armed Forces Day at Cherry Point, North Carolina, when I was an heraldist. And we had the experience there of getting the pieball ready, and we released the pieball, and instead of going up, it went about 50 feet, and then it headed right off east and went that way for about a half a mile, and then it jumped up about 25 feet, and then it came right back over our station, and then it released right into the air until it disappeared. And we were having a congressional group come down to see the demonstration of a Marine Corps plane dropping a bomb in the middle of the fairway and then pull out again. And
those sound like turbulent wind conditions.
Yeah, right.
That
sounds like a really wild vortex that was right when you were sampling it.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, vortex, it must be. They circulated it back around to where they launched it from.
So you had a vortex that was happening there, Alan.
Yeah.
Thank you for calling.
Wow.
Richard in Stoughton, Wisconsin. We'll go to you. Hi, Richard.
Hey, guys. I've noticed that when there's a thunderstorm approaching or severe weather, and whether it rains or not, it often seems like sound is dampened. Like where I live, I can hear a highway And if the storm is approaching, those highway sounds are gone. And I'm just wondering, is that brought on by something out in front of the storm, or what might that be?
Interesting.
Yeah, it sounds contrary exactly to what I might expect. And here's why I say that. If you have, as a storm's approaching, one of the characteristics that can be associated with an approaching thunderstorm in the summertime is the cold pool from the evaporatively cooled air, and that gives you the gust front. And that air is pretty strongly stratified. Now, it might be windy, and it might erase the sound of the road because there's other sounds. That's possible. But other than that, if it's not so windy, the stability might channel some of those sound waves, and it would make them louder. I was just talking to my class today about what happens when I wait for the bus in the wintertime after a fresh snow and it's really cold. I can hear the bus from farther away on those days than I can any other day of the year because the sound waves get trapped in the low-level temperature inversion and get to my ear without being, dissipated or sent straight up. So I would have thought that might be something that happens with the gust front. The other possibility is other people also saw the storm coming and just down on the roads. Now, I don't know. I don't say that as a joke. I just wonder if that's part of the whole ecosystem here of various things going on.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I was thinking gust front as well. But I couldn't come up with a better answer than what you just did. So
there you go, Richard.
Also, sound waves travel better in cold air. Right?
Yeah,
so that's
and they get trapped in the inversion, don't they?
Yeah. I'm just thinking of your bus.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Oh, I didn't think of that. Yeah, that's right. They do better than that in that, too, yeah.
It's a function of temperature.
It's a combination of things.
Richard, thanks again. Bill in Wausau. We'll go to you now. Hi, Bill.
Hello. In the winter of 76, 77, I was living in northern Minnesota, Cass Lake, Minnesota. Just moved there from Southern California. That was the coldest winter in history, and Lake Superior did freeze over for the first time in white man's history.
Oh.
Yeah, I know that was a bad winter, and it was a bad winter to move there from Southern California. Wow, that must have been a shock. But I forgot that was a year when the lake did kind of freeze over. And we got close in 2013, 14, or 14, 15. I forget which one, but it was close, but not quite on Lake Superior.
I was looking at the ice cover on the Great Lakes, and the Superior this year had a larger than normal amount of freezing.
Oh, is that right?
Oh, really?
Okay.
On it, and I think there was only one Great Lake, and which one was it? I can't remember now. Was frozen over completely.
It must be Erie.
Probably Erie. That's the shallowest one.
Probably Erie. Yeah. Now that I'm thinking about it, was probably Erie.
When in the winter of 76, 77 was the first one I lived in Colorado. It was warmer than could be. I mean, I would bike to work.
Yeah, so funny.
In a T-shirt. I mean, it was just so warm. I couldn't believe it.
The ridge just sitting over the Rocky Mountains. It must have been all winter long, and the downstream side was freezing.
Was freezing.
Wow. Yeah.
Bill, thank you for calling. Bob in Kewaunee County. It's your turn. Hi, Bob.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. I am parked along the shore of Lake Michigan up here, watching one of my bald eagle nests today, and she's breezy. But my comment is, well, quite some time back, I called back and asked if it was getting windier overall, and you guys said, according to your records, no. But I'm just wondering if the events that we've been having lately have been more violent in their and are just more powerful and for longer durations than we've had in previous years.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, when we were looking at the wind speed, we were looking at the mean, not necessarily the maximum wind.
Yeah.
So it could be getting more turbulent.
Yeah, and
that I wouldn't know.
In some way, it's consistent with your supposition that, it might be that in the face of average winds decreasing, the ones that stand out are the really windy ones. And it might be true also that those contribute more to the lower mean. So maybe they're all kind of related.
Yeah,
in a way.
Jane emailed us, are there still storm spotter training classes in Wisconsin?
I would think there are.
Me too,
now, I say that hesitantly because they're done by the National Weather Service, and right now they're not being treated so well, even though they were extremely important to have and to do those courses. so people are trained to observe them.
They usually do them in like mid to late March, if I remember right.
Yeah, before
the
season breaks
really
out.
comes on. So maybe they're going to be available. And Steve, you have a good point. I don't know. Who knows?
Yeah.
And Ruth in Algoma emailed to say there doesn't seem to be a day that goes by that satellites aren't being launched into space. We also hear reports of space junk floating around and at some point plummeting to Earth. Are there any effects to weather and the atmosphere for the confluence of satellites that are above us and continue to go above us?
I wouldn't think so. I mean, most of them, by the time they get up there, they're in outer space, and then when they come in and burn up, sometimes they don't just randomly burn in. Usually you have to save enough fuel in order to intentionally bring them down at a particular location, like in the Pacific or Atlantic or something. And even though they're big and there are many of them, in terms of the comparison to the mass of the atmosphere, they're pretty relatively small.
Yeah, and none of them cast a shadow. So they don't they don't intercept solar radiation that would otherwise hit us.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine the vastness. I mean, to think of the vastness of the area above us compared to each satellite. That's
right. Yeah.
Not that
It's not
maybe
that
the
big.
size
Enormous.
of a truck or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
There's lots of miles.
There's lots of miles
in
up there.
between.
Are they 32,000 miles or 32,000 kilometers?
36,000 miles is what the geostationaries are.
Yeah,
And
so
then
that's
the,
12 times, isn't it? Or something close to 12 times the diameter or the radius of the Earth?
Yeah.
So they're huge. They're way out there.
Paul in Arcadia has something for us. Hi, Paul.
Good afternoon. Love the show. Love weather. Mine came from a sixth grade earth science teacher, Professor Joe Brown. I remember him standing in front of the class with his meter stick, rotating it clockwise, counterclockwise, trying to demonstrate high and low pressures. My mom could watch the Weather Channel for just hours. But where did your love come from, or your influence to get to the point where you've done enough to teach, to instruct, and to share with others? What's your backstory, guys?
That's a great question. You want to go first?
I'll be short because my
Okay.
backstory was I initially was really interested in physics and being a physics teacher. When I went to undergraduate school, that rapidly dissipated because a lot of it was associated with nuclear physics, and I really didn't like things I couldn't see. And a friend suggested I take a meteorology class, and so I did. And it was applied physics, and that just got me on the path here.
Yeah, that's great. I was interested from the time I was a kid, and I had a morning paper route as a boy from the time I was 8 years old. And I got to be the first one out in the snow, and I grew up in northeastern Massachusetts. This was 4 years after Neil Armstrong had been the first person to put footprints on the moon. So I felt like Neil Armstrong every time we got a snowstorm. And on top of that, I was the first kid on the block who knew we weren't going to have school because my dad was a public school teacher in a town some distance away from us. And if Newton had school off, I knew Peabody would. So I'd get back from my paper route on those days, and I was thrilled. I knew I had the day off. So that thrill of the Neil Armstrong and being the first in the neighborhood to put footprints in the snow never wore off. I still feel that way today.
I love it. Oh, Kathleen sent us a photo, which it's too hard to see. She had a hole in a cloud.
Oh, yeah.
Which is right above the car in the photo. And it
could be an aircraft penetrating the low-level stratocumulus. They're all supercooled water droplets. The propellant from the engines looks like ice. And so they seed a little spot of the cloud where the plane comes through, and those water droplets turn into ice and fall out. And they have a limited spot where that happens. So I'm going to guess this is somewhere near an international airport. Is that true or not?
Milwaukee.
Yep, there you go.
On that note, Steve, John, thank you both again. We'll look forward to your next visit next month.
All right. Looking forward to it.
See you then.
Steve Ackerman and Jon Martin, our guests. We can say they're from the Department of Atmospheric and Oceanic Sciences at UW-Madison. Producers, we got lots of it. Well, we got two of them, Clara Neipert and Joel Patnott. Our technical directors are Lee Rayburn and Jeff Robbins. And our executive producer is Jill Nadeau. I'm Larry Mealer. Thanks so much for listening, and stay with us. Lots more in store here on WPR News.